Hello everyone, my name is Exabu and it's been some time since I covered anything related to Panzer Corps 2. I mean, it's not too easy making videos about new content for a game that hasn't had any new content since July. The release of the Pacific DLC is still months away, and the continuation of the Axis Operations saga is taking an even longer break. And this is why it was so nice to get a 3 free mission bonus in the November 2021 patch for Panzer Corps 2, and it's these 3 missions, Voronezh 1943, End of the Bulge, and Meridian, is what we're gonna crack today. And right off the bat, let me just tell you that I really enjoyed playing the 2 historic scenarios and 1 completely imaginary one. And before we get into the specifics of each mission, let me share just a few general thoughts. 1. Don't expect a very easy experience. These missions are tough, and you can compare them to the likes of Grozny or Battle of the Ebro. I also kind of disagree with the difficulty levels suggested in the briefings for the missions, as they list Voronezh as the easiest one and End of the Bulge as the hardest one, while in reality I ended up beating my head against Voronezh 1943 for a long time and completed End at the Elbe on my first try, during a stream no less. 2. All these missions present combinations of offensive and defensive movements. You never have the troops to control these maps, as they're designed specifically to consistently keep you off balance and make the best use of scarce resources. These 3 missions are kind of setting a new standard for what you would expect from a Panzer Corps scenario, and I really hope that they successfully function as a testing ground for new approaches to scenario design in future DLCs. 3. In all of these scenarios, you'll encounter enemy counterattacks, and this time the exact composition of the enemy troops you're gonna face is randomized. There are preset probabilities for certain units showing up, and so every playthrough of these missions is going to be kinda different. So actually, let me just shoot myself in the foot and tell you that while my approaches to these missions kind of worked for me, your mileage may vary and you might get more or less lucky than I did. In any case, this adds a little bit of replayability to these missions, and if you're getting super unlucky with the enemy reinforcement waves, remember that the composition of these waves is determined when they're generated, not at the beginning of the mission. So if the enemy is completely crushing you, it might be worth rolling back a few turns, which actually is a decent tip in general. And finally, point number 4. It's actually not a big one, but I really enjoyed the inclusion of the weather forecast in the briefing for the missions. It really helps with planning your corps and avoid stupid mistakes, and in real life, meteorological data like this would be available to a high-level commander like the player, so I wouldn't even discard this as gamey. Really looking forward to having this in future DLCs. And now, let's crack the damn missions. Alright, let's start with the easy one, and the first thing we need to keep in mind is the composition of our corps. And here's where a little bit of historic knowledge is actually gonna help, because in 1945, which this mission represents the events of, Luftwaffe was pretty much non-existent, at least in the West. And while I know it's so very tempting to get all these wonderful jets, they'll just hog your corps slots, you will have a lot of trouble dealing with enemy air forces, and probably not be able to run any decent bombing missions anyway. So get a couple of El Cheapo quad anti-air guns just to complement the Via Belviende you're already given, and cover your retreating troops from the persistent strafing. Also try to avoid any half-tracks and truck vehicles. Because of the difficult terrain in this area, plus snow, they'll just get bogged down and it's death in this retreat-based mission. So for example, take Hummel as your artillery instead of Panzerwerfer. It's actually cheaper and will be there when you need it. Right, now to the mission itself. Completely forget about your troops at Cell. Don't expect to relieve them, use them to slow down the enemy advance in the northwest. The defenders at Bastogne one can actually hold for quite some time if you position them right. So send them into the forests and try to hold the enemy advance from the south in that area, and send all of the troops at Marne to take and hold Houffalize. Actually, Houffalize is going to become the crux of the whole operation, and the units you are supposed to save, located at Bourret, should immediately push towards Houffalize and secure it, because there will be a few scattered enemy infantry units in that area, and you really don't want your tanks getting head-to-head with them in the forests. It's also easy to get stuck at Houffalize, because at that point you'll probably encounter some enemy troops coming from the north, as well as the encircling enemy units coming from the east. You need to get east, so those latter ones are your priority, and so once the clear path towards the east is open and you more or less can cover your flanks, push rapidly. And if you look at the map, there are two roads leading towards the coveted escape hexes. One is through Clerves and the other one through Saint-Vit. And if you're going for a tank-heavy corps, I think it's clearly a good idea to go through Saint-Vit because of the plain hexes there, and because it's the tanks that you need to save after all. But do expect a huge greeting committee to expect you there. So make sure you approach the plain west of Saint-Vit in force and have powerful tank destroyers. Getting a Jagdtiger for exactly that purpose is a good idea, and so is trying to trap enemy tanks in the forest west of Saint-Vit to mop them up with your retreating infantry. Once you encounter the enemy there, don't rush it, duke it out. You can actually grind through that wave. The enemy advancing from the west might actually start encroaching on your troops from the rear, so don't be afraid of sacrificing units, of sacrificing your anti-air guns or infantry, anything that isn't the units that you need to save for the objective. And once the road through Saint-Vit is clear, just push all of those objective tanks across the river and towards the escape hexes. Thankfully, the eastern bank of the river is completely empty and you're not gonna encounter any resistance there. And now let's look at my favorite of the three, the absolutely fantastic Meridian. By fantastic, I mean it's completely imaginary, as you're controlling the German-supported British forces on a fantasy map against the Soviets in 1942. How's that for a scenario? Oh, wait, Hexaboo, you say? Are you alright? Have you gone cuckoo? Maybe a little crack? Or completely bonkers? You've got a dozen Vickers MK6 in your corps. What are you gonna do with them? And I respond to that, but of course, there's but a fine line between madness and inventiveness. But the truth of the matter is that your top ground units suck against the Soviets. Most of the damage against enemy vehicles will be dealt by your so-called auxiliary and bonus units. Compared to them, everything you buy is going to be subpar. So why not just embrace the suck? At 150 prestige and 2 core slots, you can buy a lot of them. And while they do fall apart whenever they see a T-34, their soft attack rating and 1.5x firing speed means that they'll be very effective against Soviet conscripts, cavalry, SMG infantry, and these will come in droves. Being able to field such a huge number of units will allow you to be pretty much everywhere at the same time and send your best tanks and tactical bombers whenever enemy tanks are sighted. This also facilitates taking the German depots that the mission mentions. There are 3 in total. 1 to the west of Vine. The German flag is a dead giveaway. It'll give you a Stug 3 G unit, a very nice AC. 2, the southernmost village on this map will get you a Panzer 3M. And 3, the village east of Port Keys will give you, in 1942, a Panther. All these units are highly experienced and overstrength, and getting all of them as quickly as possible is one of the priorities for this mission because they make your life so much easier. Finally, get your best bombers. They are absolutely worthwhile and much better than what the Soviets have. They'll be critical in destroying the powerful non-randomized units on this map and will be instrumental in supporting your Vickers garbage trolleys. But do be careful about your fighters. Getting Spitfire 9s may be a waste of core slots, as Spitfire 5s will do the job getting you air superiority in this mission, in which our immediate targets will be to secure Porta Torre, The Grove, Meridian City, Wing City, Reddy, and Vine. Retreat from Port Keys if you don't want to lose those units, and be prepared for repelling Soviet attacks coming from the east. As you can see, 3 out of 5 Soviet reinforcement zones are in the east, and so the probability of something nasty coming that way is relatively higher than in the south or the north. Your best auxiliaries should focus around Meridian City, as the Vickers horde rushes towards Reddy and takes it regardless of losses. Leave a strong detachment with a good infantry, an AT gun, and an artillery at Vine. It is a bit too distant and disconnected from where most of the action is, and you really don't want to get surprised there by the Soviets coming from the south. And once this western area of the map is relatively secure, push east in a converging attack from Meridian City southeast and from Reddy east and northeast. These Vickerses should actually never stop moving around, but do coordinate the main push into the fields so your better tanks can support your horde. And once the fields are yours, pivot north towards the hub and the silver mine. At this point, most of the nasty preset Soviet units should be dead, and your task will become that of a fire brigade fighting off any attacking wave that dares show up. Voronezh 1943 is actually the first mission out of these 3 that I managed to crack, and I think it's the most difficult one as well. And I think one of the important sticking points here is reliance on weather. Achieving air superiority is definitely an important hidden task in this mission, because otherwise the Axis planes will start just destroying your tanks in the open fields and prevent your own wonderful Sturmovicks supporting your tanks rushing far to the west past Daria Skal. So load up on those LA5s, you're not gonna regret it. Also try to avoid wheeled and half-tracked vehicles as much as you can. The roads are scarce here and you really don't want to lose that operational mobility. So do the actual mission, and the presence of bridging units on the flanks of Voronezh kinda suggests something. And that something obviously is that we surround Voronezh on our side of the river, cross the river, block the bridges, encircle Voronezh, and then gradually whittle down the defenders, which is exactly what you should do. Just make sure that the units you use to surround Voronezh in the east are as worthless as possible. Certainly don't let those very nice auxiliary tanks get bogged down in the east, and once you clear that nearest objective, push them to the south, which is where your crossing will take place. It's actually preferable to doing it in the north, because I've found the south to be less defended, plus one of the routes that the Germans will use to counterattack later in the mission comes from the northwest of Voronezh, right next to your potential northern crossings, so it's all really not a good idea. Also, if you after all need to push wheeled vehicles across the river, take that southernmost village and repair that broken road. Otherwise, neither trucks nor half-tracks are gonna come through. In any case, once you cross the river and secure the bridgehead, push northwards, capture the bridges, and establish the encirclement. You should expect a huge German counterattack coming from the north there, as mentioned, so leave a good, powerful detachment of troops at the bridges. A couple of tanks, an AT gun, and maybe keeping your bombers within range should suffice. Obviously, don't forget about gradually pushing the defenders of Voronezh. You will have to clear the city after all, but there's no rush, as your main force pushes west, take the Rogovatoye objective, and expect a German counterattack coming from the southwest. But thankfully this area is slightly more defensible, so a couple of tanks, a strong infantry unit in the town, an artillery, and maybe an HC gun behind it will do the trick. In my successful playthrough, I didn't even destroy all of the attackers coming from the south and set up a good enough defense to convince the AI not to attack. Alright, Rogovace is yours, and now your much smaller advance force continues pushing to the west, and there will be defenders northwest of Rogovace. There will be quite a lot of resistance, and I recommend you to wipe all of those guys out. Don't let them just retreat into the fog of war, because they will get reinforced, and these units are said to be pretty aggressive, and if kept alive, they are very likely to come back and bite the defenders of Rogovace in the bum. Now, Stario Skol isn't gonna be defended too well, although there will be a couple of very strong tank and anti-tank units sitting there, so make sure you keep your bombers handy, and also clear the area around the city. For the reason already mentioned, you really don't want these guys coming out of nowhere and attacking you. The Germans will send a smaller attack force to Stario Skol, and at this point you will really have to weigh the forces you still have, because all of those guys at Voronezh, at Rogovace will probably be tied, and all of the forces you are left with to split them between keeping them at Stario Skol, pushing towards Kursk, and pushing towards Bayan, because it's very unlikely that you'll have the time to do all of these objectives in sequence. And once you start pushing west and south of Stario Skol, make sure that all of the bombers and fighters you have are in the area and can do everything to support your already very weakened ground troops. Alright, and this is it for the bonus winter mission pack for Panzer Corps 2. And to be honest, after cracking these three, I'm really looking forward to the continuation of the story of Axis operations. I hope it is well worth the wait. Cheers.